Hey, it's Emily Miller, and I'm back with the report on buying your gun with cash. Cash is king. Everything changed in the last week because Visa, MasterCard, American Express, the big three credit card companies, announced that they are now going to start categorizing separately anything that you buy in a gun store. So when I heard this news, the first thing I thought, use cash. I don't want to get tracked. I don't want someone to know, the credit card companies and the government to know where I'm getting my gun, what I'm buying, what guns I have, what ammo I have. So the first time I heard this news, I started calling around and I wanted to know, am I the only one thinking this or are other people doing this? And so I started calling some people I know who own gun stores, federal licensed dealers, and then I found Dan Eldridge. Dan has a store called Maxon's Shooter Supplies. It's just outside Chicago, I know, in this dangerous city. That's not his gun store. He has a really fantastic shooting range and gun store. And I said to Dan, I got this news, seeing this news, seeing everyone report this, they're categorizing it differently. My first thought was, buy cash. What do you think? And Dan said, Emily, I'm already ahead of you. As soon as the news was announced, I called my vendor for an ATM machine, and I'm going back in as soon as they can do it. I was really surprised that I found Dan after all these calls, who actually was already ahead of me on this idea that people are going to start using cash. Dan said that he took he had an ATM machine in his store and took it out because bank charges to it were just too expensive. But he went back to it just after this news of the credit card and called his vendor and said, put it back in. Dan told me that before all of this, when he had the ATM and the credit cards weren't tracking our gun sales from gun stores, he would have about $1,000 to $1,500 a month sold from the ATM in sales. But Dan predicts that with this new ATM and these new credit card issue, he's going to have between $10,000 and $15,000 a month coming from cash in his store. So an enormous change, enormous shift. So clearly I was not the only one who had this idea. So I wanted to just fill you all in on, because you read my story on Substack, emilypostnews.com. And I'm also just going to interrupt for a sec to tell you, if you are one of the people who have been commenting to help me out with the tech side of doing YouTube videos, stay to the end of this video and I'll tell you what I've adjusted slightly. I've done 3 different things in this video that I'll tell you about at the end. So from your comments. So thank you. And please keep giving me comments on the tech side because I'm learning YouTube. I'd love to be able to do this, but I need your help. All right, back to my story. So Visa announced it's called a merchant category code. That's the term for when you get your credit card statement and it says grocery, gas and fuel. So there's a new one from this Organization of Standardization, which is an international organization that sets these things. I never heard of it before this whole happened, but called iOS. They added this merchant category code for firearm sales. And so the only way you can do that is if you just go to stores that are firearm sales. So it's not actually on your credit card for firearms. It doesn't know that it's a gun. It doesn't know that it's ammo. It just knows what store it's from. And that's a tricky part about this. Well, there's many tricky parts about this. It's very creepy. But one of the tricky parts about this, as Dan pointed out to me, is you could go into his store and buy a $2,000 safe for your gun, and you're going to be tracked as a firearm sale then. Or you could go to Cabela's and buy a gun, and it's going to say what does he say? Sports supplies, or sports category, that category in your credit card. So there's actually no way that it can be tracked, but it will be tracked if you use a credit card at a gun store, which is really unfair to the gun store owners, as if they were part of this crime spike we have in the country. They're not the problem. The criminals are the problem. However, so Visa, MasterCard, and American Express all say they are going to go along with this and they're going to start doing it. They've been under enormous pressure, these credit card companies and these banks, from the gun control organizations, the activists, Bloomberg, Gabby Giffords, Everytown, all those places have been, Brady organization also, they have been really pushing the banks, really pushing the credit cards to do this because they claim doing this will stop mass shootings. They're not even claiming it's going to stop criminals or stop the crime spike that we've seen in this country in the past 2 years with this enormous increase in homicides, enormous increase in carjackings. They're not claiming that's going to affect it, because it won't. They're claiming it's going to stop a mass shooter because they claim, and some of them are like Elizabeth Warren, and I'll read you what Elizabeth Warren wrote. Financial institutions and payment networks such as Visa, MasterCard, and American Express can and should do everything they can to help law enforcement prevent some mass shootings by identifying suspicious gun purchases through the implementation of, my piece of paper here, this new code. So that's a letter that Elizabeth Warren and about 20 Democrat senators and Congress people sent to these banks, pressuring. So the government's pressuring these banks, also these big pension funds that want to be, anti-gun, pro-gun control, which is anti-Second Amendment. They've been pressuring the banks. So that's where this is coming from. And that's what the result of it is, that they were successful. Another politician who's been big on pushing this to happen is New York City Mayor Eric Adams. And then when they did it, when the merchant code went into effect and they changed it last Friday, they announced it last weekend, Mayor Adams, New York City mayor, said they heeded our call to create a new merchant category code for firearms and ammunition sales. He said, this is a smart, common sense measure that will track suspicious gun and ammunition sales, saving lives and making our city safer. Now, how does it make our city safer if the credit card companies and the banks know what I bought, for example, at Maxon's shooting supplies? How is that? If the criminals are not going into gun stores and buying guns. That's just not how they get them. They buy them on the street. They trade them. They buy them from each other. They steal them from each other. That's how criminals are getting them. And again, I reiterate, no one's claiming this is going to reduce crime. They are all saying this is going to reduce mass shootings. And I've done multiple stories, and you can go back into my reporting, and multiple stories of mass shootings. Mass shootings account for, although we hear about them on the news all the time, every one of them is horrible and terrible, and I am devastated every time I hear of one. However, they are extremely rare, and so it is about approximately less than 100 people killed every year from a mass shooting in the entire country. Less than 100. Some years it's a little bit more like 50, some years 75. One year I think it was 125. And you can go into any of my reporting and I'll show you the statistics. It's a very rare crime. So putting merchant codes on the entire country to supposedly know when, say, as Dan said to me, who owns one of these stores, if you buy 2,000 rounds of ammunition, so they're going to track that on your credit card, you've got this big charge for 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Does that mean you're going to go shoot up the Navy Yard? Or does that mean you are going to go to the shooting range and there's a competition that weekend? It doesn't, you see, there's no way, there's no record. And I said, Dan said, there's no way for credit card companies tracking to identify potential crimes. He said a buyer could buy a big safe and they wouldn't know. And this is what he said, quote, "There's no report that you can run that would have any universal parameters as what is a flaggable transaction. Did you buy 2,000 rounds of ammunition to do something nefarious, or are you going to a shooting competition this weekend?" And Dan said, this is a push by anti-gun rights activists to further stigmatize gun owners. So I interviewed Dan on the phone when I heard about this. I also checked in with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. They are very powerful. They represent the gun stores, the legal gun owners, federal licensed gun owners. They also represent the firearm manufacturers and ammunition manufacturers in DC. So NSSF for short, National Shooting Sports Foundation. So I checked in with them about this, what they said they were going to do, and Mark Oliva, who's head of their public affairs, I talked to him, and he's the one who first clued me in on this also as well. He said, I've already heard reports of firearms retailers that plan on installing ATMs in their stores for this purpose. So I talked to Dan, and then Mark confirmed to me as how I was sure I could report this story. I had two sources saying this was true. And this is a reminder, this is Mark talking, this is a reminder that cash is king. Similarly, I am doing the break for tech update again because I did the same thing. And if you know the answer to it, just tell me. My screen goes to black when it's recording. I think it thinks it's sleeping. So I don't know how to stop it from going to sleep in the middle of doing my YouTube video. So that's why I keep leaning over and then stopping myself. So I'm doing it again. I'm sure I'm recording again. So that's one tech problem. If anybody has an answer for that, please let me know. Number 2 is, I can't figure this out. Strike file, you told me I need new lights. I have 2 lights. I have 2 lights right here. He says I look too yellow. I agree with him that I look too yellow, but I don't know why. I've put these lights, there's a thing on it in the back for warm, cold, and I put it to all the way cold. So there's no yellow coming out of these lights. So the only thing I can think of is I've got windows in front of me, and to the sides you can see, is the natural light making me look yellow? Because it's not the lights themselves. They're very white. So if anybody has an answer to that, I would really like that help. James suggested that, he said I'm moving around too much. One thing about me, whenever I'm on TV, and I consider myself basically on TV right now, I always stand. It's just the way I like to. I'm just a physical person. I also have a standing desk, which is what this is on. I don't like to sit very much. So I was standing, and he said I was moving around too much. And so he suggested, which is exactly what I did, which is actually what they do in TV studios, and I'd forgotten. He said, add a stool. So I am now slightly seated, leaning on a stool, so I'm not moving around as much. So thank you for that tip, and a reminder of something I knew and totally forgot about. So I appreciate that. Jasmine, you told me that I'm saying too much and pausing too much and sound too casual. And I said to you, I'm not sure what to do about that, because if I was back on TV as a reporter, I would be looking at you straight into the camera like this with a teleprompter and reading it. Or I would have memorized about 2 or 3 sentences if it was live and I had no teleprompter, and I could report back. So at the beginning of this video, if you've noticed, I just stared right into the camera and was pretty much memorized the first few sentences. And that's about all anyone can do. And then they would switch to teleprompter. So those shows that you see, the newscasts that you see, when the person doesn't stumble, doesn't say doesn't have to think, it's because the words are right there in the screen. I don't want to do that. I could do that. It probably would be easier for me because that's what I'm used to. But I think YouTube is just, if you wanted to get news like that, you would turn on NBC or ABC or Fox. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm still playing around with all this, so I really want your feedback. So please tell me what you think about how I should be, how I should act. Is it too much TV news, too not TV news? Is it hard to follow if I'm speaking around? The other thing I'm doing, so Jasmine, thank you for that feedback and constructive feedback, and I'd like you to look back at the beginning of this video and tell me if I changed it correctly and you like that better. The other thing to know, and there's an I'm starting to hear them now, Jasmine, thank you. The other thing that I do is that I'm taking my Substack story and reading it to you, or reporting it again to you, because this is how I do it. And when you write something for print, it's definitely different than TV. And when I went from being a print reporter at the Washington Times to being the chief investigative reporter at Fox 5 DC, I had to completely learn how to write for TV. It's a completely different medium. It's different from being a guest on TV. You see people guest, you get asked the question, and then you respond, which is a natural conversation style, which we all can do. But when you are the anchor, you are the reporter, you have to write a script that is very different than print. And shorter, it's shorter, tighter. You can't use numbers, you can't use facts. Interesting, they don't like that kind of stuff on TV. It's very visual, and you don't have a visual because I'm not editing this to be a TV package. I don't know how to do that yet, and I'll get to there. But I would have, normally I'd have probably have Eldridge on with me doing an interview, and I would have video of a gun store in front of me while you heard my voice. So there's things that I can't do because I'm not skilled yet on the editing process to be like TV, but also I'm trying to figure out what works on YouTube versus what works on television. So all that being said, this is the tech side because I mess up, and this is a little tech minute. Please help me in the comments with these things. Finishing the story, I think I read to you, I wanted to tell you, finish what Mark Oliva was saying. about the legality of what you're doing if you are someone who's going to buy a gun, that cash is a legal, if you are going to buy your gun with cash, this is a legal method. That's absolutely fine. Personally, I put everything on a credit card. And I do this because I get 3% back. On my Wells Fargo credit card. I also have a Costco credit card because I love Costco. So I like the cash back, so that's why I use credit card. Also because now the credit cards are on my phone. I don't even have to carry a wallet or a credit card. I just zap my phone, Apple Pay, I guess, that way. So it would not be, for me, it would be a totally different operation to get the cash, go to the bank, get the cash to the ATM, and go to a gun store. But only because of this tracking, it occurred to me this is something I would do. And I think other people are also starting to think through this really brings up a lot of issues of everything we're buying, they're tracking. People are tracking. And now they're openly saying we're tracking it for criminals. Well, they're tracking it, period. So if you do start using cash, if for guns and ammunition, Mark, who they are the biggest lobbyist here in DC on it, said it still requires the same background check, but saves the buyer the inconvenience of knowing their credit card providers would be collecting information that could potentially be used to build backdoor gun registries by unelected and international bureaucrats that are unaccountable to the voters. Well, now we get into the gun registry issue. That's a fear a lot of gun owners. If you're not a gun owner, it's a fear of a lot of gun owners and it is because it is against federal law to have a registry of who owns a gun. There's nowhere in the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, there's nowhere that says the government has the right to know who is keeping and bearing arms. And that's the issue. It is against federal law to have any kind of registry of gun owners. It's a private issue. It's your decision if you choose to have a gun in the home. The government does not get to know about that. And that's why when you do a background check through the FBI background check system and ATF runs your background check through NICS, it's called, those records are only kept for, I think it's 48 hours, 72 hours, and then they're released. And that was part of the law when it happened in the Brady law, that they could only keep it for a certain amount of time for this exact reason, that the government cannot track who has a gun. So people are saying this credit card issue is basically making a registry, because now all the banks and all the digital operation knows exactly who's buying a gun, or at least buying something at a gun store. So then I wanted to check in with, I've known all these groups for so long. Now I've been doing gun control issues for so long. So I always like to check in with all of my sources when I do one of these stories to see if I'm missing an angle or maybe I understand it correctly. Another person I talked to is Alan Gottlieb from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Sorry, Alan Gottlieb is from the Second Amendment Foundation. Both have foundation. The Second Amendment Foundation has funded these big lawsuits that made a huge difference. I think they funded Heller. I could go back, but that's their whole mode of operandi, is to fund lawsuits against unconstitutional gun laws. So Alan said to me, I talked to Alan, a great guy. He's the founder of it. He's been there forever. Very nice man. There is no doubt that using cash to buy firearms and ammunition helps to protect your privacy. So he agreed with me on that. However, this assault on the firearms industry will hurt sales, as most people use credit cards to make purchases. That is what the gun prohibition is trying to do, as well as create a database. So when I talked to Alan, I thought, okay, I'm not the only one who instinctually just takes my phone around and starts using credit card. People are going to go into the gun store who aren't aware of this, or are aware of this, and maybe not go to the gun store that day because they don't have the cash and they don't want to be tracked. And it is a deterrent, and he's saying that that's legitimate. Finally, always checking in with the NRA on everything, because they've got their finger in everything related to guns, and that's what they do for a living. And so many people are members who are also on my subscribe to me, so thank you. I talked to Lars, I actually just texted Lars Dalseide and asked him what's going on about this and the fear of this registration database. And Lars told me this is not about tracking or prevention of any virtuous motivation. It's about creating a national registry of gun owners. With a few keystrokes, this new code creates a list of people who purchase firearms, ammunition, and firearms-related accessories. That's the very definition of a registry. So, consequences, I will say already there's some consequences. Visa put out a statement saying this is not what we intended to do. They're still doing it, but they tried to back off because there was such a backlash about this. I mean, over half the country has a gun in the home. This is really going after a lot of people. And up on Capitol Hill, Senator Josh Hawley wrote a letter to the CEOs of Visa, MasterCard, and American Express to ask them to reverse their decision. So it's not actually a done deal. It is going to happen, but he's asking them to reverse the decision. And he wrote in this, see, my computer just went to sleep again. And I want to make sure it's recording, which it is, I think. Hawley wrote, "This move has been described by multiple media outlets as a major win for gun control advocates, and they are not wrong. Too often, companies have abused their market power to target the constitutional rights of conservatives and others with minority viewpoints." And I think that's very clear, the broader picture of companies going after conservatives, whether it's for Roe v. Wade, whether it's for gun stores, whether it's for other issues, that they don't treat everybody the same, liberals and conservatives. And just a final point from Dan, I thought was a really interesting point to make. This is just one more data point showing the gun control people hate us, don't understand lawful gun ownership, and are more interested in scoring political points, political wins, than meaningful action against the criminal misuse of firearms. So, I mean, that's the bigger picture here. This is not going to stop any crimes. It's not. It's just going to attract people who have guns. Cash is king. If you go to a gun store, I mean, and you don't want your cards to know, you don't want your banks to know, you don't want these bigger companies to know, you don't want the government to know, then you're going to have to just use cash. And that's just the only way around it, unless they reverse this decision, which is highly unlikely, since they've got so many members of Congress and the Senate, Mayor of New York supporting it. So that's my report. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to subscribe to my channel. Hit the subscribe button. Also, please tell your friends. As I'm building this up, as you know, I have a lot more followers on Facebook and Twitter and Substack. So my Substack is always emilypostnews.com. That's where I write from. That's my home base. Can't get deplatformed there, which I love. But please let your friends know that I'm up on YouTube now and we'll be doing these video reports. And I really, really appreciate all of you who've been so kind to me in leaving really helpful comments and supporting me and encouraging me. It really helps me because I'm just like I'm out there on doing this and I don't know if it's resonating. And so your comments mean so much to me. I really appreciate that. Please continue to leave them, and I read everyone and trying to respond to everyone as well. Thank you very much.